Clara's heel snapped. The sharp crack echoed against the marble as she stumbled forward, clutching her tiny clutch bag and praying no one noticed. Unfortunately, someone did. A pair of polished black dress shoes stopped in front of her. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, past powerful legs, past the perfect cut of a tuxedo, until she met the piercing eyes of President Alexander Ward. Her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. This wasn't how she'd imagined her night going. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, smooth, and threaded with authority. Clara swallowed hard. "Yes, sorry. I shouldn't even be here." He studied her for a beat, his gaze scanning her thrift store dress, her trembling hands, then returning to her face as though weighing something far more important than her words. "Walk with me," he said finally, his tone brooking no refusal. Before she could protest, he offered his arm. His palm was warm, steady, anchoring her in a sea of glittering strangers. As they moved, the golden chandeliers glinted above, music from a string quartet curling through the air. Every head seemed to turn toward them, whispers trailing in their wake. Clara's mind whirled. She had slipped into this event under a mistaken invitation, one she knew wasn't meant for her, and now she was walking beside the most powerful man in the country. He guided her to a table near the front, pulling out a chair for her like a gentleman from another era. "Tell me," he said once they sat, "how a girl like you found her way into my ballroom." Her pulse tripped over itself. "There was a mistake. An invitation delivered to my apartment." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes darkening. "I don't believe in mistakes, Clara. Only opportunities." The way he said her name, slow, deliberate, sent a strange shiver down her spine. She felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. They talked, or rather he asked, and she answered, until she forgot about the glittering crowd, the aching strap of her broken heel, the fact that she didn't belong here at all. His focus never wavered, his gaze lingering like a touch. As the night deepened, the music slowed. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I'll be gentle," he whispered, every word a promise. "And I'll go slow. But if you let me, tonight will change everything." Clara's chest rose and fell in quick, uneven breaths. She didn't know if she was ready. She only knew she couldn't look away. Alexander stood, extending his hand once more. "Come with me." The world beyond the ballroom doors was unknown, dangerous, and magnetic all at once, and she found herself rising to follow.
Welcome to another episode of Ever After Romance Audiobook. If you are hooked already, subscribe now and comment where you are listening from, because I will be dropping another story as interesting as this tomorrow, and you don't want to miss it. Let's begin the story.
Chapter 1. The Invitation Behind Closed Doors. The ballroom's hum faded the moment the heavy oak doors shut behind them. The muffled strings were replaced by the soft, deliberate echo of their footsteps on the polished corridor floor. Clara's pulse was loud in her ears. She'd never been in this part of the presidential residence, at least not beyond what the news cameras showed. The hallway was lined with portraits of former leaders, all watching her as if judging her right to be there. Alexander's hand brushed hers as they walked, just enough to send a wave of heat crawling up her arm. It wasn't accidental. Nothing about him felt accidental. I should really go," she murmured, though her steps matched his. "You could," he replied, glancing at her with an almost amused tilt to his lips. "But you won't." The quiet confidence in his tone made her shiver. They turned into a smaller room, warm light, deep mahogany walls, and a single crackling fire in the hearth. It smelled faintly of leather and cedar, masculine and refined. He closed the door behind them, the soft click somehow louder than the music had been. Clara clutched her clutch tighter. "Why bring me here?" Alexander moved closer, the space between them shrinking, until she had to tilt her chin to meet his eyes. "Because, Clara," he said softly, I don't want to share you with a room full of strangers. Not tonight. Her breath caught. She wasn't used to being wanted like this, not by someone whose presence seemed to pull the air from the room. You're trembling, he noted, and she realized he was right. She tried to speak, but his gaze pinned her in place. You think I'm dangerous. I know you are, she whispered. Instead of denying it, he smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips. And yet, here you stand. The firelight painted gold across his sharp jawline, the shadows deepening the mystery in his expression. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek with the back of his fingers. The touch was feather-light, but it left her dizzy. You said you'd be gentle, she reminded him, though she wasn't sure if it was a warning or an invitation. And I will, he murmured. But gentle doesn't mean I won't change you. Her heart skipped, her knees weak enough that she gripped the edge of a nearby chair for balance. He leaned in, not kissing her, not yet, just letting his presence wrap around her like the heat from the fire. Tell me, he said, his voice a low velvet. Are you afraid of me, or of what you'll feel if you stay? Clara opened her mouth. A sharp knock rattled the door. Alexander's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving hers. Don't answer, he whispered. The knock came again, harder this time. Chapter 2. The first interruption. The knock echoed again, firmer this time, like whoever stood on the other side knew they had a right to demand entry. Alexander's gaze locked with Clara's, a silent warning in his eyes. Stay here, he murmured, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people obey before they thought about it. But Clara wasn't sure if she could move, even if she wanted to. Her legs felt rooted to the rich carpet, her pulse trapped in her throat. He crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps, each one radiating control. When he opened the door just enough to look out, she caught only the deep baritone of another man's voice. Sir, the Chancellor is asking for you. It's urgent. I'm occupied, Alexander said evenly, though his tone carried a sharp edge. A pause. Then the other man replied, Shall I tell him you'll be there shortly? Alexander's jaw flexed. Tell him I'll come when I'm ready. The door closed again with a quiet click, but when he turned back, his expression had shifted. Harder, more determined, as though the interruption had only deepened his resolve. Important? Clara asked, her voice softer than she intended. Not as important as this, he said, crossing the space between them in 3 long strides. Her back met the arm of the chair before she realized she'd stepped away from him. His hand came to rest on the chair's edge beside her hip, caging her in without touching her directly. She could feel the heat from his body, the faint brush of his breath. You shouldn't look at me like that, he said. Like what? She whispered. Like you're already wondering how far you'll let me go. The words wrapped around her, pulling tight. She could deny it, but her silence said more than any protest could. The fire popped behind them, sending a brief spark of light across his eyes. He leaned in closer, his lips a breath away from her ear. 1 month, he murmured. Stay here with me. No games, no lies. You'll be safe. She pulled back enough to see his face. Safe from what? His gaze darkened. From the rest of the world. For a heartbeat, she thought about saying yes, about what it would mean to live in this gilded place where power hummed in the air, where he looked at her like she was the only person who mattered. But before she could answer, the knock came again, louder, sharper. This time, the voice on the other side was urgent. Mr. President, we have a situation. It can't wait. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, as if weighing the cost of leaving her now. When he opened them, the heat in his gaze hadn't dimmed. I'll be back, he promised, his voice low and certain. And when I return, Clara, I want your answer. And then he was gone, the door shutting softly behind him, leaving her in the warm, silent room, alone, but far from untouched. Chapter 3. The Situation Room. The moment Alexander stepped into the west corridor, the air shifted, cooler, sharper. Two suited security agents fell into step behind him without a word. His expression became unreadable, every trace of warmth from the drawing room gone, replaced by the mask of a leader who could not afford hesitation. "Situation?" he asked as they walked. "Intelligence flagged a breach, sir. Potential leak in tonight's guest list." Alexander's mind sharpened. A leak meant someone had seen something, or someone they shouldn't have. His thoughts flickered, unbidden, to Clara's wide eyes and the way she had looked around the hall earlier as if memorizing it. She was innocent. He was sure of it. And yet, the timing was dangerous. The oak double doors to the situation room opened, and the low hum of urgent voices filled the air. Advisors gathered around the oval table, the wall screens glowing with encrypted feeds. "Mr. President?" the Chancellor began, rising to greet him. "We've isolated the suspect list to 3 names." Alexander took the dossier without sitting. "I'll review it privately." "Sir, protocol." "I said privately," he cut in, his tone silencing the protest. As he flipped through the papers, his jaw tightened. One name was unfamiliar. One was a foreign journalist. And the third, he froze. Clara Bennett. The photo attached was from earlier that evening, her in that soft blue dress, looking startled. The Chancellor's voice was carefully neutral. "She wasn't on the original guest list. We traced her entry back to an invitation switch, possibly deliberate." Alexander closed the folder slowly, his fingers pressing into the leather cover. Every instinct told him Clara had stumbled into this by accident. But if someone had maneuvered her here, she was a pawn in a much bigger game. And pawns in politics were always the first to fall. "Continue monitoring," he said. "No one approaches her without my authorization." The Chancellor frowned. "Sir, she could be the leak." "She's not." His voice was low, dangerous. "If anyone treats her otherwise, they'll answer to me." There was silence for a beat, the kind that told him every person in the room now knew this woman mattered to him in ways she shouldn't. He turned and left before they could push further, his mind already on the path back to her room. But halfway there, his earpiece crackled. "Sir, we've lost visual on the girl." Alexander stopped dead in the corridor. "What do you mean, lost visual?" "She's not in the residence anymore. Last camera feed shows her heading toward the East Wing service elevator, alone." His pulse spiked. The East Wing at night was a maze, and worse, it was where the unsecured staff exits were. Without another word, Alexander broke into a run, the sound of his shoes pounding against marble, echoing through the silent halls. Chapter 4. The East Wing. The hem of Clara's dress whispered over the marble floor as she hurried down the dim corridor. She hadn't meant to wander this far, but the tightness in her chest since Alexander left the room had driven her to move. Anywhere, as long as it wasn't standing still with her thoughts. She'd spotted a quiet passage near the drawing room, partially hidden by a velvet curtain, and slipped through. The palace was full of grandeur, but here the light was softer, shadows gathering in the corners. Every step echoed in a way that made her feel exposed. She told herself she was only exploring. But deep down, she couldn't shake the strange weight of Alexander's gaze earlier, or the way her skin had tingled under it. Being near him had been dizzying, like standing too close to fire. Her fingertips brushed the carved paneling as she walked, following the faint hum of machinery. That was when she saw the narrow elevator doors, brass, slightly tarnished, clearly older than the gilded lifts in the main halls. The button gave a muted click when she pressed it. The doors opened with a sigh. She stepped inside. The small lift smelled faintly of oil and wood polish. She expected it to rise or fall toward some grander floor, but instead it groaned and slid downward with a quiet shudder. Her stomach flipped as the air grew cooler. When the doors opened again, she found herself in a hallway unlike any she'd seen upstairs. Low ceilings, plain walls. the faint scent of detergent and damp stone. Somewhere far away, she could hear the muffled sound of water running. "Hello?" she called softly. No answer. A prickling ran down her spine. Something about the stillness felt wrong. She turned to step back into the elevator, but the doors slid shut in her face with a heavy thud. She jabbed the button. Nothing. Her heartbeat quickened. She tried to calm herself. There had to be a stairwell somewhere. Then, faintly, she heard it. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from the shadows at the end of the corridor. Clara froze, her breath catching. The figure that emerged wasn't in a suit or a uniform, but in dark, nondescript clothing. Their head was tilted down, face hidden beneath the brim of a cap. They stopped when they saw her. "Lost, miss?" The voice was smooth, but something in it made her skin crawl. Yes, I was just looking for—" "You shouldn't be down here." The man took a step closer. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She took a step back, but her heel caught the edge of a loose tile. She stumbled, grabbing at the wall. And a deep, commanding voice cut through the air like a blade. "Step away from her." Alexander. His figure filled the far end of the hall, his eyes locked on hers, fury simmering just beneath the surface. Chapter 5. The Rescue. The man's gaze flicked between Clara and Alexander, a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "Just helping her find her way," he said, voice dripping with mock innocence. Alexander's shoulders squared, the authority in his stance unmistakable. "You're in a restricted wing. You have 5 seconds to leave before I have security remove you." The man's smirk faltered, but he didn't move. His eyes lingered on Clara, too long, too bold. Alexander stepped forward, closing the distance like a predator closing in on prey. 4. The intruder muttered something under his breath, but backed away, disappearing into a side door with a slow, deliberate swagger. Clara let out the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her knees felt unsteady. I was just exploring. I didn't know. You shouldn't have been here." Alexander cut in, his voice firm, but there was a rough edge beneath it, not anger. Something sharper, protective. "This area is off limits for a reason." Her stomach nodded. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble. Do you have any idea what could have happened if I hadn't—" He broke off, his jaw tight, his hands flexing at his sides as if fighting the urge to reach for her. Clara looked away, her cheeks burning. "I'm fine, really." "No," he said, softer this time, the word carrying a weight that made her chest ache. "You're not." She finally met his gaze. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The dim light caught in his eyes, making them look darker, deeper, like a storm barely held at bay. Alexander closed the last few steps between them. His cologne was subtle but intoxicating, warm spice over cool night air. She felt the heat of him before he even touched her. "I can't—" He stopped again, his voice lowering. "You don't belong in this world, Clara. It will eat you alive if you're not careful." Her pulse thudded. "Then maybe you should stop pulling me into it." The corner of his mouth twitched, but it wasn't amusement. It was something more conflicted, more dangerous. "I've been trying." The elevator dinged behind them, breaking the moment. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter first. Clara hesitated, her heart still racing, her mind still tangled in the feel of his nearness. She stepped in, and he followed, his presence filling the small space until it felt like the air was too thick to breathe. As the door slid shut, their eyes met again in the polished brass reflection. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was louder than any words could have been. And somewhere in the unspoken weight of that moment, Clara knew, whatever had just happened was only the beginning. Chapter 6. The Confession That Almost Happened. The elevator hummed softly as it descended, but to Clara it felt like the walls were pressing in. She could feel Alexander beside her, his broad shoulders rigid, his gaze fixed ahead, but every nerve in her body was aware of him. When the doors opened, instead of leading her back toward the ballroom, he veered down a quiet hallway. "Come with me," he said, his voice low but firm. She followed without question, her heels clicking softly against marble until they entered a private lounge. The space was dimly lit, with velvet chairs, a fireplace, and windows overlooking the dark gardens outside. Alexander poured her a glass of water and handed it over. His hand brushed hers, and the contact was enough to make her breath catch. "You shouldn't be wandering around here alone," he said finally, his tone calmer but still edged with something dangerous. "There are people in my circle who don't play fair." Clara took a sip, trying to steady herself. "Why did you come after me?" He froze for a second, his jaw tightening. "Because I saw you leave, and because I couldn't—" He stopped himself, looking away toward the fire. "You couldn't what?" She pressed, her voice quieter now. His eyes found hers again, and the intensity there made her throat tighten. "I couldn't let anything happen to you." Something in the way he said it felt heavier than protection, more personal, more dangerous. She tried to smile, to cut the tension, but it came out soft and uncertain. "You don't even know me. I know enough." He took a slow step closer. "I know you're not like them. I know you don't wear masks, and I know you make it impossible for me to keep my distance." Her breath hitched. "Alexander." But before she could finish, he lifted a hand and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shiver through her. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had narrowed down to this. His hand, her skin, and the space between them that was shrinking with every heartbeat. Then a sharp knock rattled the door. Alexander's gaze snapped toward it, his jaw hardening. "Yes?" A muffled voice came through. "Sir, the press is looking for you. They're asking about the young woman." Clara's eyes widened. "Me?" He didn't answer, but the tension in his stance told her enough. Without another word, he took her hand and pulled her toward a side exit. "Where are we going?" she whispered as they slipped into the shadowed garden. "Somewhere they can't find you," he said, not letting go. The night air was cool, but Clara's heart was pounding far too fast for her to feel it. And as they disappeared into the darkness, she realized she might be in far deeper than she ever intended. Chapter 7. The Garden Where Secrets Grow. The garden smelled of roses and rain, though the night had been dry. Moonlight spilled over the marble paths, tracing silver lines through the hedges. Clara's heels sank into the soft earth as Alexander led her deeper, away from the mansion's lights and into a pocket of stillness. "Here," he said, stopping beside a stone bench hidden under a canopy of vines. "They won't come this far." She caught her breath, half from the walk, half from the way his hand still enclosed hers. "You have a lot of hiding places, Mr. President." He gave a faint smile but didn't release her. "In my world, privacy is a luxury, and right now you need it." Clara glanced back toward the distant windows of the residence. "Why would the press even care about me?" His gaze held hers, unflinching. "Because you caught my attention, and that makes you dangerous." The words landed between them like a spark. She wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or afraid. "You make it sound like I'm a scandal waiting to happen." "You might be," he murmured. And for the first time, there was a teasing note under his seriousness. She looked away, embarrassed, but then felt the warmth of his hand leave hers, only for him to take off his suit jacket and drape it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body, and she pulled it closer, surrounded by his scent. "You're shaking," he said softly. "It's cold," she lied. He studied her a moment longer, then sat beside her on the bench, close enough that their knees touched. "Clara, I don't often meet people I can't stop thinking about. You've been in my head since the moment I saw you." Her heart gave a startled leap. "You barely know me." "That's the problem," he said, leaning in slightly. I want to. The air between them thickened. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, the steady rise and fall of his chest. Her fingers tightened around the lapel of his jacket, fighting the pull that made her want to lean closer. You shouldn't, she whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it easier to resist. I know, he replied, but his voice held no intention of letting go. For a moment neither of them moved. The sounds of the party were a faint hum in the distance, drowned out by the rhythm of her heartbeat in her ears. Then, another sound broke through. Footsteps, coming fast. Alexander straightened instantly, his eyes sharp. Stay behind me. Clara's pulse spiked as a shadow appeared at the edge of the garden path. It wasn't the press. It was a man in a dark suit, his expression grim. Sir, it's urgent. You need to see this, now. Alexander's jaw tightened. Not here. The man's eyes flicked to Clara. It's about her. Chapter 8. An Urgent Truth. The night air seemed to shrink, pressing against Clara's skin. She stepped instinctively closer to Alexander, her fingers brushing against the back of his hand as the stranger's words settled like ice in her veins. It's about her, the man repeated, glancing between them. Alexander's posture shifted, less relaxed, more coiled. Speak. The man's gaze flickered to Clara again, reluctant. Sir, perhaps not in front of... She stays, Alexander said, his voice calm, but edged with command. Now talk. The man took a breath. There's a leak. Someone sent photographs from tonight's dinner to multiple outlets. They frame her as your mistress. Clara's breath caught, the word landing heavy and ugly. What? They're already trending, the man went on. If they run the story by morning, it will cause a storm. And... He hesitated. It might not just be about scandal. There are also threats. Real ones. Alexander's jaw worked silently for a moment, the tension in his body vibrating through the air between them. Then he stepped toward Clara, lowering his voice so only she could hear. This is why I didn't want you in the spotlight. Her lips parted. I didn't ask for this. I know, he said, softer now. But his eyes still burned. That doesn't mean they'll leave you alone. The man cleared his throat. We need to move her. Tonight. Clara blinked. Move me? What does that mean? It means, Alexander said, you're coming with me. Her pulse stumbled. To your house? A shadow of a smile touched his mouth, though his tone stayed serious. To a place they can't find you. She shook her head, overwhelmed. This is insane. I can just go home. No, he interrupted, the single word final. They know your face now. Your name. And if you walk out of here alone, you'll be followed. I won't allow it. Her throat tightened at the quiet fierceness in his voice. She wanted to protest, but there was something in his expression, an unshakable certainty that made the words stick. The man in the dark suit shifted impatiently. We should go now, sir. The car's waiting. Alexander turned to her, offering his hand again. Clara, trust me. She hesitated, her mind a storm of questions, fears, and an undeniable pull toward him. She thought of the way he had looked at her across the dinner table, the way he had shielded her in the garden, the warmth of his jacket still around her shoulders. Slowly, almost against her own will, she placed her hand in his. Good, he murmured, curling his fingers around hers. As they stepped back through the shadowed garden, the sound of camera shutters clicked faintly in the distance. Someone was still watching, and as the residence's back doors loomed closer, Clara realized leaving with him might not just change the night, it might change her whole life. Chapter 9. The Ride into the Unknown. The black sedan waited in the shadows, engine purring. Alexander guided Clara into the back seat, his hand warm and steady on her lower back. She slid in, the scent of leather wrapping around her, rich and heady. The door shut with a muffled thud, sealing them into a quiet world. Through the tinted glass, the glow of the residence faded, swallowed by the dark. Alexander sat beside her, his broad shoulders casting a protective shadow. "Seatbelt," he murmured, his voice low, more a command than a suggestion. She obeyed, the click sounding loud in the hush. Outside, the city slipped past in blurs of light, but the stillness inside the car only made her heart race faster. "I still don't understand," Clara said softly. "Why me? Why would anyone care enough to do this?" His gaze stayed on the window, jaw tight. "Because you were seen with me, and to certain people, that means you're leverage." "Leverage?" she echoed, her voice small. His eyes finally met hers. "There are people who'd hurt you to get to me." The weight of his words sank into her. "You're the president. I knew that meant important things, but I didn't think that it could be dangerous." He finished for her. "It is, and that's why you're staying with me until this dies down." Her chest tightened. "That's not exactly a normal offer." "No," he admitted, a faint smile ghosting over his lips. "But nothing about tonight has been normal, has it?" The flicker of humor in his eyes made her pulse skip. She looked away, unable to stop the warmth blooming in her cheeks. The driver turned down a quieter road, street lamps throwing long shadows over their faces. The hush between them grew heavier, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, she asked the one burning the most. "Why are you doing this for me? You could have just let me go." Alexander studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice like velvet and steel, he said, "Because I can't stop thinking about you." Her breath caught. He leaned back slightly, his gaze still locked on hers. "From the moment you walked into that dinner, I knew you didn't belong in that world, and yet you fit there better than anyone I've ever met." Her fingers curled against her lap. "You barely know me." "Maybe," he said, "but I know enough." The driver took another turn, and the city lights thinned, replaced by winding roads lined with towering trees. The night air through the slightly cracked window carried the scent of pine and rain. Clara's heartbeat thudded in her ears. She didn't know if she was stepping into safety or danger. But as Alexander's hand brushed hers on the seat between them, slow and deliberate, she knew one thing for certain. She was already in too deep. Chapter 10. The Estate That Holds Secrets. The car slowed, tires crunching over gravel. Through the darkened window, Clara saw tall iron gates swing open, their motion smooth and silent, as if they had been expecting her. The sedan rolled forward into a long, lantern-lit driveway. Trees arched overhead, their leaves whispering in the night breeze. The world outside seemed to fade away, swallowed by the estate's quiet grandeur. When the car stopped in front of a sprawling stone mansion, Clara's breath caught. Its towering windows glowed softly, the warm light spilling across the polished steps like a welcome or a lure. The driver stepped out first, opening Alexander's door. He moved with purpose, coming around to her side and offering his hand. "Careful," he said, his voice low, steady, yet there was something in his tone that made her shiver. She placed her hand in his, the contact sending a tingle through her skin. He helped her out, and for a moment, she simply stood there, staring up at the mansion. "It's enormous," she whispered. He glanced at it briefly. "It's secure. That's what matters right now." Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly of cedar and something richer, like old books and leather. A grand staircase swept upward, its rail gleaming. Paintings lined the walls, each framed in gold. Clara followed him through a hall, her footsteps muffled by thick rugs. Everywhere she looked, there were details meant to impress. Crystal vases, carved wood panels, velvet drapes that moved faintly as if breathing. "This place feels like it has a history," she said softly. It does, Alexander replied, glancing over his shoulder. But tonight, it's simply a safe place for you. She hesitated. And you? Where do you sleep in a house like this? The faintest smile tugged at his lips. Close enough to know if you need me. Her stomach tightened, not from fear but from the strange, unsteady pull between them. They stopped before a tall door. He opened it, revealing a bedroom lit by a single lamp. The bed was wide, draped in soft linens the color of champagne. French doors at the far end led to a balcony, their glass reflecting the lamplight. You'll be here, he said. The locks are secure. No one comes in without my say. She stepped inside, her fingers brushing the smooth fabric of the bedspread. It was far more luxurious than anything she'd ever slept on. Alexander lingered in the doorway, his gaze shadowed. Get some rest, Clara. I'll be just down the hall. She nodded, but her eyes caught his for a heartbeat too long. Something unspoken passed between them, something that didn't feel like protection alone. He turned to leave, his hand on the doorknob. But before he could step away, a sharp, echoing noise cracked through the hall. It was the sound of glass shattering, and it was close. Chapter 11. Shadows at the Door. The sound ripped through the silence like a gunshot. Clara's head snapped toward the door. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Alexander was already moving, silent, fast, dangerous. In 2 strides he was across the threshold, one hand gesturing for her to stay back, the other slipping inside his jacket. Lock the door. Now, he ordered, voice a low growl that brooked no argument. She stumbled toward the door, fingers fumbling with the brass lock. The click felt too loud, too fragile. She pressed her ear to the wood, straining to hear past the pounding of her own pulse. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. Alexander's voice came from the hall, firm and controlled. Who's there? No answer. Just the faint scrape of something dragging across the floor. Clara's breath caught. She gripped the edge of the bed, every instinct screaming to run, though she had nowhere to go. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence, thick and heavy, filled the space. Her fingers tightened on the bedspread, the fabric twisting in her hands. And then, another sound, softer this time. A creak, as though someone had just leaned against the door from the other side. Clara. Her blood went cold. It wasn't Alexander's voice. Before she could respond, there was a sharp crash, this time from the opposite side of the hall. A shout, a heavy thud. The door burst open. Alexander stepped in, eyes blazing, his jacket gone and his white shirt rumpled as though he'd been in a fight. He shut the door behind him with a decisive slam and locked it from the inside. It's handled, he said, though his breathing was still hard, his jaw tight. She searched his face. What was it? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the room and cupped her face in his hands, tilting her head up to meet his gaze. His palms were warm, grounding her in the middle of the chaos. You're safe. That's all that matters. She wanted to believe him, but the way his eyes flicked toward the balcony doors told her there was more. He seemed to notice her glance and gave a small, humorless smile. You're going to stay in my room tonight, her lips parted. Because of what just happened? His voice dropped, rougher. Because I don't trust the shadows in this house anymore. She swallowed, a strange heat coiling low in her stomach despite the danger. And because you want to keep me close? His thumb brushed her cheek. Closer than you can imagine. Before she could answer, the balcony doors rattled violently. Once, twice, as if someone was outside trying to force their way in. Alexander's arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight against him as the glass shivered under the pressure. Don't move, he whispered against her hair. This time, I won't let them get near you. Chapter 12. The night that changed everything. The glass rattled again, Harder this time, and Clara's breath hitched. Alexander moved fast, sweeping her behind him as he strode toward the balcony doors. The muscles in his back were taut beneath his shirt, every step radiating control edged with lethal intent. He yanked the curtain shut, plunging the room into darkness, then pressed his palm to the glass. His other hand found the lock, turning it until the faint click echoed like a promise. The rattling stopped. For a moment there was only the sound of their breathing. Hers quick, shaky, his steady, though a touch too deep. When he turned back, his face was in shadow, but his eyes glowed faintly from the moonlight slipping through the curtain's edge. "They're gone," he said, though his tone made it clear he didn't fully believe it. Clara's pulse was still racing. "Who?" He cut her off with a gentle but firm touch to her arm. "Not tonight. I need you to trust me." She searched his face. "I already do." The truth of it startled her. Something shifted in his expression. Something warm, aching, almost reverent. "Come here," he murmured. She did. His hands found her shoulders first, strong and sure, drawing her closer until their bodies were just an inch apart. "I swore I'd keep my distance," he said softly, the words brushing her skin like a caress. "But tonight, I can't." Her breath caught. "Then don't." The quiet between them deepened, not empty, but full, of everything they hadn't said, everything they had held back. When he lowered his head, it wasn't rushed. It was slow, deliberate, a question as much as a promise. She answered by closing the last inch herself, her lips finding his in a kiss that started gentle and deepened with every heartbeat. The world outside disappeared. No shadows, no danger. Just the heat of his mouth, the steady press of his hand against her back, the way he kissed like she was something rare, something he'd been starving for but afraid to touch. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless. "Alexander." He touched his forehead to hers. "Clara, I don't care about the rules anymore. Not the politics, not the risks. You're here in my arms, and that's the only thing that matters tonight." She could feel the truth in him, steady and unshakable. Outside, the night had gone quiet again, but she knew the danger hadn't vanished. It was still out there, waiting. Yet in his arms, with his heartbeat under her ear, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt like she belonged, and as the moonlight traced the edge of his jaw, she knew, no matter what came tomorrow, this was the night everything changed. Epilogue. Morning light spilled across the room, soft and golden. Clara stirred beneath the warm weight of the blankets, blinking against the glow. For one disoriented second, she didn't remember where she was. Then she felt the steady rise and fall beside her. Her gaze shifted, and there he was. Alexander lay on his side, one arm bent beneath his head, his hair tousled, his expression softened in sleep. The fierce, guarded president was gone. Here was simply a man, breathing slow and even, his features calm in a way she'd never seen before. Something warm bloomed in her chest. She didn't want to move, didn't want to break the fragile magic of this moment. But as she studied him, her eyes caught on the faint crease between his brows, a shadow of the weight he always carried. And she remembered the balcony, the rattling glass, the danger that hadn't vanished with the dawn. Her fingers curled into the sheets. She could almost hear her own heartbeat in the quiet. Then, without opening his eyes, Alexander spoke. "You're awake." She smiled faintly. "So are you." His lashes lifted, revealing eyes more piercing than the morning sun. "I was afraid you'd be gone." She shook her head. "I'm not going anywhere." The tension in his shoulders eased. He reached for her, drawing her close until her forehead rested against his chest. "Then we'll face it together," he murmured. The words sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear, something deeper, more certain. For a long while, they stayed like that, tangled in quiet warmth. The world outside could wait. But eventually duty crept back in. He had a country to lead. She had a life that had been turned upside down in a single extraordinary night. When he finally rose, buttoning the crisp white shirt that marked his armor for the day, she watched him with a mix of pride and longing. At the door, he paused. Tonight, dinner. Just us. No guards, no politics. Like a date? She teased softly. His mouth curved. Exactly like a date. And Clara? He held her gaze with that unshakable intensity. I meant what I said last night. You matter. You're not just part of my life, you are my life. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something equally true, equally brave. But all she managed was, Go lead your country, Mr. President. I'll be here. He gave her one last look, fierce, tender, almost reluctant, before disappearing into the hall. Clara lay back against the pillows, her fingers brushing her lips where his kiss still lingered. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a reminder that their story wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready.
If you enjoy the story, subscribe and comment where you are listening from.